Was John Titor a real time traveler from the year 2036, or was he just a fraud? Now, this subject might seem a little different from what I usually put up on this channel, but this is related to nerd stuff, and I've always had an interest in science fiction and science fiction topics, and that includes conspiracy theories, which often involve these kinds of things, and these ideas of time travel and alternate dimensions seem to have gotten a lot more popularity in recent times on YouTube and other places, partially through the popularity of the Mandela effect, and I did do a video on that, which got me lots of dislikes because I disagree with the whole Mandela effect being something that is actually real. But I've been following these kinds of stories for a very long time, and there's one particular story that I've followed for many years, and it has seemed to have popped up again recently, and that is the story of John Titor. And people who are unfamiliar with the John Titor story seem to have picked up on it and have spoken about it as if it's something real, something that we can actually take his word for when this man made all these predictions. So we're going to jump into the story, and I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of who John Titor is, and we're going to talk about some of the explanations for where exactly these ideas came from. Now, John Titor was something that became very popular. He was a popular figure and mythology that showed up when the internet was still quite young, and that was in the year 2000. There was a time travel forum called the Time Travel Institute, and on these forums, somebody with the name Time Travel Zero began posting, and he claimed that he was a time traveler from the year 2036. He became more popular when he decided to use the name John Titor in 2001 when he began posting on the Art Bell forums, the former host of Coast to Coast, that popular conspiracy theory radio show. And John Titor put up a number of posts detailing his experience in the future and talking about exactly why he was here, came to the past, and what he was looking for, and he answered all sorts of questions. And over the years, this myth has grown and grown and grown. Now, nowadays, someone like this probably could not gain popularity because there are so many people that are faking all sorts of things on the internet, but this was a time when the internet was young and people were interested and people actually believed his story, and he made a bunch of predictions that people wanted to know if they were going to possibly come true. And let's just take a look at some of the content that showed up from this certain John Titor, the time traveler. Now, John Titor appeared in Florida. Supposedly, he was visiting and staying with family members, but the reason that he was traveling back in time was not just for sentimental reasons, but there was an item that he needed to retrieve, and this was an IBM 5100 computer from the year 1975. And there were certain things that this computer was supposedly able to do that he had to go back and get those pieces for it. Now, it had been discovered that indeed the things that he said this computer did were true, and the individual who had done this was very clearly well informed about computers. So it was somebody who worked well in the computer industry. Now, I've seen the claim by certain people out there today that nobody knew about this secret feature of the IBM computer until John Titor discovered it, but that's actually not true. This is something that had been known about the computer for quite some time, that anyone involved in the industry would know. Now, in order to travel back in time, John Titor was part of a secret government project, and they were using a time machine that he actually described. He had a picture of the supposed time machine that he used and even spoke about how it worked. And he said that there were two micro-singularities, or mini black holes, that ran this particular time machine, and it was able to cause one to travel back into time. Now, what he claimed about his time travel was that when one travels back in time, you are not actually going back into your own timeline, and he was trying to solve what's called the grandfather paradox, which says that how can you travel back in time? Because if you go back in time, what if you kill your grandfather? If you kill your grandfather, you would never have been born, but if you had never have been born, then you couldn't have gone back in time to kill your grandfather in the first place, and it leaves you with this paradox that's impossible to solve. Well, the way that this poster argued was that every time you travel back in time, you are actually going into a different reality, and they're all different versions of reality, and in those versions of reality, there are slight differences. Now, some people have tied this into the Mandela effect to say that these differences within the timeline today, such as Berenstain Bears, and some of these small differences would be explained by these differences in reality. So you're actually not changing your own reality, but you are going back and changing a reality that's very similar to yours. And he claimed that the farther back in time you go, then the more the actual reality would change. So you couldn't go too far back in time, because if you went too far back in time, then it might in fact be unrecognizable from the timeline that you are actually from. So when you're going to go back into your own time, it will actually not be exactly the same universe that you left. There may be small changes in some areas and others. Now, this is all well and good. This is all an interesting story, but there are some very specific and testable things that John Titor told us that we can use to try to verify whether or not John Titor was actually telling the truth and he was a time traveler from the future, or if he was just a very intelligent hoaxer that happened to be pretty well informed about IBM computers. Well, he made a bunch of predictions, and we can look at those various predictions and ask the question, well, did these predictions actually come to pass? Now, he argued that CERN was going to discover time travel, or at least begin to realize that time travel was possible around the year 2001. At this time, these mini black holes that he spoke about would have been created, and obviously this did not happen. And unless CERN secretly has these things, which I'm sure some government conspiracy theorists say they do, then we don't have any evidence that such things were ever discovered at all. He also said that in 2004, civil war would break out as there would be divisions between people groups within the nation of the United States of America. Specifically, he argued that cultural centers and cities alongside of rural areas would come into conflict with one another over various issues, and there would be massive war and chaos at that time in the United States. He said that the last Olympics was going to happen in the year 2004. He spoke quite in detail about this as well, and clearly these things have happened since then. And these are only a few of those particular things that he said were going to happen. He spoke of a future, and a future that he believed was a better future. And in that supposed better future, people would live at peace. They would be more religious. People would live in small towns and more rural areas. And he described this as a much better time. And so all of the civil unrest and all of these crazy things that happened, according to John Titor, led to a time that was indeed much better than it had been previously. Now, some people will point to certain statements of John Titor's that seem to say something about a website that might be similar to YouTube, and there are some other things that you might be able to squeeze in and say these are predictions that have been fulfilled. But nearly every major thing and major event that John Titor predicted just did not happen. Now, what's happened since then is people have come up with all sorts of explanations as to why this was the case. Some people say, well, John Titor, part of his mission, even though he didn't tell us, was indeed to come and fix all of the problems that had happened in this world, and so he actually fixed all of these things. And so the reason that things didn't happen the way that he said that they would is because he found the solution to them. In particular, people will point to something that happened back in 1998, because while John Titor did not rise in popularity until 2000 and especially 2001, he actually sent faxes to Art Bell in 1998, speaking about the disaster that Y2K was going to cause. Now, clearly Y2K did not cause any kind of horrific disaster. However, it was speculated that by some of his supporters that what happened in 1998 was that John Titor actually fixed the problem that would have been Y2K, and because he fixed that problem, then all of these other issues would not happen. Now, my question is, if that's really the case, then wouldn't John Titor have mentioned the fact that he had done that in his post in 2000 and 2001, and he would have already noticed the differences between his reality and our reality where Y2K didn't happen, and he probably would have said something about it and would have realized that this would indeed change the future course of history. But that is not the case, and indeed is not the case because John Titor is simply a hoax, and that's all there is to it. And what he did within his explanation is really he left himself all of this wiggle room so that no matter what he said, if it went wrong, he could always go back to the excuse, well, it's a different world. And because there are these parallel worlds that are similar but not identical, any of the things that he said as predictive prophecy could have just not occurred because of the nature of our reality. So really there is no way to actually disprove John Titor's predictions because of that. And so his supporters will continue to support him no matter of all the failures numbers that actually occurred through what John Titor has said. And if you look at the supposed fulfillments of certain predictions and you look at them, they're really not that detailed at all, and they're not really clear. And if he did indeed come from the past, why didn't he give us some very particular and very specific ideas of what would happen in the future? Because every time he did do that, those things didn't happen. And every time he gives some kind of vague idea of something that might happen in the future, well, then people say those are the things that are fulfilled. And I think that it's not a coincidence that the major detailed events are the ones that we don't have any evidence actually occurred. So who was behind the John Titor hoax if this really was a hoax? Well, we can actually find the information out pretty quickly, even through a quick Google or YouTube search and looking at the relevant information, which a lot of people who have studied this issue seem to have not really done very well. But as we look into these details, there's one piece of evidence that's very important to keep in mind, and that is there is a registered John Titor Foundation. And the person who runs the John Titor Foundation is a lawyer in Florida, the same area where John Titor supposedly lived, and his name is Larry Haber. Now, Larry Haber is a lawyer in Florida, and he has trademarked the John Titor title. He claimed in several places that he was the official lawyer of John Titor, claimed that he had spoken with him as well as his mother, and that he was indeed a real person. Now, there had been planned projects, movies, and other things based upon the John Titor name that people had been trying to start and promote at one time. Now, those projects generally fell through, though there is a Japanese anime that does bring in elements of the John Titor story. So it's pretty clear that Larry Haber, as the lawyer, would have had very much an interest in promoting this story. Now, is there any evidence that Larry Haber himself would have had the knowledge of the computer systems to be able to say the kind of things that he did? Well, not really Larry Haber himself, but Larry is part of a family, and in that family there are brothers who have all said that they're very close to one another, and they just so happen to work on computer systems. In particular, they are knowledgeable about IBM computers. Now, it has been mentioned that Maury Haber, who is Larry Haber's brother, works with computers. He is a computer scientist. He is very familiar with IBMs, and he is the most likely candidate in this particular hoax. Now, a YouTuber by the name of John Razimus of the Hoax Hunter channel has looked into this for many years, and he's provided some clues in terms of the language that was used in writings from Maury Haber and the similarities in language between Maury Haber and the posts of John Titor. And while some of those similarities might just be, coincidence in terms of having a similar style of writing, some of the language that's used by both is very particular. Some of the most distinctive phrases and terms that show up repeatedly in John Titor's writings end up showing up in the writings of Maury Haber as well. Now, recently, hoax hunter John Razimus has made public a certain strain of emails that he had with with Arthur Haber, who is another brother of Larry and Maury Haber. And in those emails, there is some indication that Arthur does indeed know exactly who John Titor is, and he says that it's kind of a joke within the family that they all laugh about. Now, this pretty clearly demonstrates that whoever is behind John Titor, it's involved in the Haber family, and none of them take the thing too seriously because one of them was behind it. Now, later, Arthur Haber ended up saying that he has no idea exactly who was involved, but he knows that it is somebody within the family. This ended up leading to him concluding that the son of Larry Haber, named Brandon Haber, was actually likely behind it. That was a supposition that he had, but this really doesn't make any sense because when John Titor first started writing, Brandon Haber was 9 years old, and he would have had to have been a pretty clear, amazing genius to be a 9-year-old who was so well informed and could write as well as he could with so much computer and scientific knowledge. So whether or not it is indeed Maury Haber or Brandon Haber is just some kind of child genius, it's very clear that John Titor is not a real time traveler. It was indeed a hoax that was perpetrated by the Haber family. Thanks. If you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, and share.